Hello, I'm Clive Howe. I'm a retired Post Office Telephones BT Manager. I have recently taken up amateur radio. I used to shoot air rifles and air pistols target shooting at the club in Henley in Arden, and field target shooting at Penkridge. That's shooting at metal targets outside. For the first 10 years of my life, I grew up in Hubmore Road. My dad, grandmother and aunt had moved into the house when it was new in 1927. I'm the only son of Fred and Ivy, and we, for some years, had chickens, Rhode Island Reds, that lived at the top of the garden. At the front of the house we had a nice wide grass verge, and just after the war they were still there, pig bins, galvanised dustbins that you put your vegetable waste in, which were taken away and made into pigs' dinners. The co-op milkman, till 1960, used a horse-drawn vehicle to deliver the milk. The competition had battery electric vehicles, traditional milk float. Their garage, where they charge the vehicles, is the cycle shop just round the corner from here.
Oh, the one on the main road?
Yes, which was built and used as an auxiliary fire station in World War II. And there's a 10,000 gallon galvanised tank there. The flats above were the crew quarters for the fire brigade. But I remember it as a child, open fronted, and that's where all the Midland Counties milk floats were being charged. So the milk would be delivered, loaded onto the floats, and then off they went. And Dad, during wartime, worked shifts in the garage. And my mother was called up by Wilmot Breeden, something to do with Lancaster aircraft, and they wanted her to stay on after the war, but she decided not to. She was a housewife. I used to come home from school for lunch. In 1959 a new school opened and the old building closed, which was further away from home. It was Blakesley Hall County Infants Primary School.
Remember the name of your teacher?
Yes, it was Mr. Podmore, because I was in top juniors. The headmaster was Mr. Allen and the deputy head, Miss James. She was very involved with Red Cross. The school was opposite the local doctors, and the local doctor knew my grandmother. She passed away in the 1930s with heart problems. And he became the president of the BMA, Dr. Arthur Beecham. There was a ward named after him at East Birmingham Hospital, now Heartlands. If that's gone, I don't know. Yes, we used to play with my childhood friends in the garden, or I'd go to their house. My aunts and uncles visited occasionally, but they were busy working. But we used to pop regularly to my grandparents, who lived in Alum Rock in Farndon Road. They had moved there in the 20s to a council house because there were 6 children and 2 adults in a terraced house.
You mentioned your grandfather there. What sort of work did he do?
He was a porter on the railways. He worked at New Street, and recently I met a woman working on the delicatessens at Morrison's in Sheldon. Her father was a porter at New Street, and her grandfather and my grandfather were similar ages. He'd been a professional soldier in the Boer War, but invalided home, and joined up in December 1914, served in France with the Royal Regiment of Warwickshire and alongside Gurkhas, then came home and was on defence of ports, but invalided out of the army in 1917 because he'd fractured his skull at work on the railways in 1913. So he was awarded, because his services were no longer required, a Silver War Badge. My mother went to Loxton Street School and was the only pupil to pass the 11 plus, and she went to Waverley Road Grammar School, and she recalls going with my grandfather to a shop called the Don to buy her school outfit. I belong to the school scout troop. That's the 87th Birmingham Beaton troop, and recently I saw them at the Swan shopping centre doing a charity job. They've got the same colour neckerchief with a cap badge at the back, but the scout uniform had changed quite a bit.
Do you remember any of the names of the people you went to school with?
Yes. F.O. Evans, Maffa, Alan Matthews, Janice Murkitt. Her mum and my mum were best pals, and they lived just round the corner in Millhouse Road. But I lost contact with these friends. But the children who lived nearby I played with. Our house was a council house, but it was the parlour type. We'd got a front room. The other side of Hudmore Road were non-parlours, so you walked in, not into the hall or the front room, straight in, and their toilet was outside. Over the road lived Colin Riley, a couple of doors away, Morris and Martin Hubbard. Down the road, David Smith, David Meredith. Meredith's parents and my parents worked together at AD Wimbush many years ago. On the other side was another Smith, no relation to David, Alan Smith. I was the youngest of the gang, so I was the one that the tricks were played on. We lost touch when I moved to Leicester, but we met up again in 1965 when I returned to Birmingham. But we'd lost that continuity of friendship.
How old were you when you came back to Birmingham?
16. He was a motor mechanic. He served an apprenticeship at AD Wimbush in their garage in Whitmore Road, Small Heath. When he was thinking about marrying my mum, he wanted a bigger wage because he was on half the wage at AD Wimbush that a qualified motor mechanic could earn elsewhere. He applied for a job at Post Office Motor Transport, undertook an all-day trade test, and there was one vacancy and Dad was successful. So there were 99 disappointed people. One of the tests he had to do was drive a motorcycle combination round a pillar, left hand and right hand, which was very easy for him because he had a motorcycle combination. He'd had two. The first was a 1927 AJS 350cc. The second was a 500cc Roger Whitworth motorcycle combination, which was rather special because he's got a Bonaxter speedometer and had been used by Graham Walker, Murray's dad, as his runabout motorbike in the 1933 TT Isle of Man races. He bought it from John Pugh, who was a director of Roger Whitworth because the company was going out of business, and John Pugh belonged to the Atco Motormower family. But unfortunately he sold it September the 3rd, Sunday, September the 3rd, 1939, because the Second World War was going to be declared and he hadn't got a garage for it. I visited the Commercial Street garage when he was a fleet manager. Now, Commercial Street was unique because it opened as a motor transport garage in 1938. It had dormitories for postman drivers. Previously, the site had belonged to the National Telephone Company, but on the site now was a brand spanking new garage for the fleet and also stores for post office telephones. He wasn't released for war work, although he wanted to go. He spent most of the war as a charge hand, that's a foreman motor mechanic, at Commercial Street. During September 1940, he saved the garage. They had a stick of 27 incendiary bombs through the roof. The vehicles had fabric bodies, so one of the things that happened was that the bombs welded themselves to petrol tanks and onto engines. So with the help of some of the postman drivers, they put everything out, but couldn't save an ammunition train which was parked over the way because they hadn't got a garage, they hadn't got a ladder long enough. I went to the Christmas party that they organised. He was the workshop supervisor of a garage in Hurst Street, which was the Birmingham depot for the road haulage fleet. And the entertainer that we had for the first party I went to was a ventriloquist, Ray Allen, with Lord Charles. Absolutely fantastic. And I got a present, And my dad's deputy, his son Kenny, and I were looking after each other at the party. Kenny later worked for Post Office Motor Transport. I was on the engineering side. He then moved from the Green Fleet to a job in Leicester, just round the corner from Premier Drums. And every Friday he'd got to go to the bank to draw the wages. And Leicester Police said you must go at the same time. He'd got a workshop of 20 mechanics, and I visited the Benson Street garage a couple of times. He was also training some Fijian people to be motor mechanics. Well, Maurice and Martin's dad, he worked at the BSA. I think he was a toolmaker, but a very talented amateur artist. And on VE Day, my dad was 6'2½". Mr. Hubbard, Edgar, he'd got a pencil moustache, corporal, RAF. They were in the three-legged race, so it was like little and large.
Who won?
I didn't find out, but it was held at Burton Road School. Not the junior school, there was a senior school on the same site, which opened in 1927 to cater for the children of this estate of council houses. Colin Riley's dad worked at the Rover. Alan Smith's dad was a bricklayer, and he used to travel to work and home on it was a green colour BSA Bantam. David Meredith's dad worked at AD Wimbush. Peter Smith, both mum and dad, worked for British Rail. And my godfather, mum's eldest brother, worked at New Street. And because they were both Smiths, obviously they knew each other. I told my mother, I told mum when I was about 4, I wanted to be a vicar, because you only work on Sundays. Yeah. But later, I saw a photograph in a book of some BBC engineers in front of a control panel with a clipboard and a warehouse coat, which I later discovered was called a cow gown because it was brown. I wanted to be a switch engineer. So I became a post office engineer instead. I worked for Post Office Telephones as a trainee technician apprentice. The apprenticeship was structured, so the first half of the apprenticeship you worked with the external technicians. You started with cable jointers and the overhead gang, riding, if you'll pardon the expression, in a gamecock, I think it was a carrier vehicle, in other words, you've got a crew cab. The jointers jointing copper cables or coaxial cables. When I started to shin up a pole, wooden ladders, very heavy, no safety helmets, and a leather safety belt. Then you worked with the fitters who installed telephones. The one job I had there was working at Birmingham Airport, changing all the labels on the 700 type, well, every telephone at Elmdon Airport, because all figure numbering was coming in. So that means 0121. There are about 400 telephones, the explosive ones and all sorts. Went all over the place. Control tower, customs and excise. Then sub-zapping line, that was maintenance. I worked from Sheldon. All the vehicles were bronze green then. The fitter I worked with, he'd got a minivan. He was very quick, and about every fortnight he broke it. Then moving on to internal works, I worked in telephone exchanges, which we call a switch, repeater stations. Then in the third year you had to choose what you wanted to do, and I decided I wanted to do internal planning and moved into a planning role. This is where I met a friend who I've known for more than 50 years, Stuart. He worked down the corridor from where I was. I then climbed the ranks, and at 21 I became a technical officer, which was the highest grade of technician that could be had. And once again, a planner. And I changed various departments of planning and eventually became a manager.